Hello everyone, welcome to Internally Screening. Today we're going to be doing another Hooptober review, and today we're going to be reviewing Possessor, directed by Brandon Cronenberg, the spawn of the body horror king himself. He's had a little spawn who's also gone and become a director, who also makes body horror films, and I've been looking to see Possessor for a long time. It stars Andrea Riseborough and Christopher Abbott, and it's a sort of sci-fi body horror thriller spy assassin mystery film. The central premise of it is that you have people who are actors who can somehow have their consciousness implanted into another person's consciousness so that they can infiltrate, which gives them an advantage in assassinating various important people. In this case, it's Sean Bean for some reason. Yeah, I've been looking forward to seeing this for ages. What did you think of Possessor?
I thought it was an incredibly eerie, uneasy, and aesthetically kind of like disturbingly beautiful film. Like, it has a real way with its visuals of blending body horror often in a way that's more existential than it is actual physical, maiming or don't get me wrong, there is a fair bit of that as the film goes on, but the majority of it kind of comes from the front cover is like a particularly kind of pivotal aesthetic idea, like visual thing of someone's like face kind of sort of morphing and falling off, or like kind of wearing a mask of yourself. And so I think it does a really interesting sort of deft weaving of existential ideas into the visceral. And I think it's helped, aided massively by two fantastic performances from Andrea Riseborough and Christopher Abbott. Christopher Abbott, who looks unsettlingly similar to Kit Harington, which was quite distracting for me early on. Because you have this initial focus on Andrea Riseborough's character, I was uncertain when this film shifts to focus on who she's performing as, the person she's inhabiting. I was wondering if there would be a drop-off in quality, but they managed to match each other's performance levels in a really satisfying way, where you never feel this drop-off or this sense of disbelief that one person is kind of inhabiting the other. Like, they do fantastic jobs.
Well, it's quite sort of a disorienting film in that sense, because as an audience member you kind of expect to be going and thinking, okay, Andrea Riseborough is our character who is, the protagonist of the film, who, you kind of feel, because she's your perspective in the film for at least the first portion of it, this is the person you should be sort of semi-rooting for. But the film, the core theme of the film is identity. And the way she's inhabiting Christopher Abbott's body for most of the film. So Andrea Riseborough herself is actually not in the film even that much, to be honest. But there's this kind of disorienting way through the plot line where she begins questioning her own motives, apparently. And Christopher Abbott's character begins fighting back after some events in the film. You sort of get confused on purpose by the film's own design on who is who wants what. It's a really interesting take on body horror, because I think, like you said, body horror is often about existentialism and identity, like The Fly we reviewed last Hooptober, right? And that is, that's all about that, and that is probably like the gold standard of body horror in that vein. It's a bit unfair to compare this to The Fly, but I think this is different enough, but it almost works as a kind of interesting companion piece thematically. Because it's not so much about one person's identity going through a metamorphosis, it's more about two people's identities blurring together. And the ending of it and the conclusion it draws to is quite satisfyingly bleak.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you can definitely tell Brandon is a protege of his father, because this shit is hideous and bleak. But what it is in a way, it's like a kid growing up watching art films and like sort of maturing through like A24 era shit, but then doing what his dad did with all the horrible body horror shit. So you kind of
his dad is still doing, to be fair.
Oh yeah, true. But like you kind of got this strange mix of aesthetics. It's actually it's like both a beautiful film and a hideous film. All at once, whereas Cronenberg films were just scuzzy, dirty.
There's a kind of aesthetic cleanness to it, which I think adds to the sort of disorientation you have as a viewer, because the film is sort of very clean, and there's these sort of odd visual details about, the technology of the time. Everybody's vaping, which is really weird, but kind of interesting. I don't really know why they're doing it, but it seems to be a very purposeful choice. And
there's the job the guy has where like she when she sort of first goes to his like first day on the job, and what they're doing is they're going through like home video, like they're like hacking into the back of people's cameras to work out what fucking
like curtains
they have, what like items they have around the room, so they can target advertising or data mining, which is like that in of itself as a singular idea was horrifying and probably horribly close to reality.
It's a great throwaway detail.
That's exactly it. You could make a whole film out of that one thing, but they just kind of chuck it in to colour the world. And also kind of colour his backstory, because I think it's interesting that while you have this really kind of dystopian idea of like assassinations being like done psychically, you also have like the real world around it is similarly kind of grotesque in its own way, like, but cleanly grotesque. It's really strange. So yeah, that you've got all these sort of wage slaves in this weird sort of brutalist
well, he's supposed to be quite
room.
high up, to be fair, isn't he?
He is, but he's also doing like really
dirty
like,
work.
Yeah, like mundane shit. I don't know. It was interesting seeing these two sort of parallels, one infiltrating the other, only to find like some just like the most mundane, hellish existence. It kind of almost reminded me of like Brazil.
Yeah, very Brazil. Yeah,
where like where you just got all of these fucking machines doing like God knows what. It's all just like. Yeah,
and it's also like the hero's journey, if you want to call that, of the character has a sort of similarly bleak conclusion.
Yes.
I mean, I guess it's also worth touching on, this is a horror film, although really it's kind of in that much sort of artier, I guess, like you said, like now that's kind of a concept that seems to be sort of owned by A24. So it's more of an A24, colourful horror film with sort of more atmospherics and moodiness to it than something like The Fly, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is more of a straight up horror film, I think. I kind of like the blend though, because I think it's not just, I'm going with the trendy aesthetic. It also fits with the fact that this film is, at least in a good portion of it, genre-wise, is a sort of spy infiltration film.
Yeah.
And that kind of cleaner aesthetic and some of the mise-en-scène of like the skyscrapers and the big sort of mansion they go to at that one point.
Yes.
It sort of feels like a really fucked up Bourne film or something.
Yeah, I could kind of go for that. Yeah, I mean, this film really dwells on atmospherics and the sort of existential dread rather than like pure shocks and scares. I really like, so another detail coming back to the aesthetic side of things is you never really know where they are in the world. There's no like, as far as I can remember, there's no specific mention of a city, and everyone's kind of got a mix of accents and stuff. Everyone's kind of like a mix of American and English
and the future.
Yeah, and I kind of like that. It's a really clever and effective way, I find, to bring you into a world without just bombarding you with exposition and stuff like that, where you feel like everything is a little bit alien to you.
Yeah.
And you can't quite put your finger on why, but you notice a few different things. And it kind of, it helps, it aids massively this belief that this situation could happen. Your suspension of disbelief is really aided by that kind of, those subtle cues.
And I mean, when it comes down to it as well, when it gets to be really, really bloody and violent, this film is really fucking violent.
Yes.
Like, it almost, you could probably go, I don't know how far into the film, maybe an hour or so, without a whole lot of violence going on.
You get an opening kill,
you do,
which is some stabbing, which is, violent, but not like unexpectedly.
Well, it escalates a lot. Let's say
that's exactly.
There is a point in the film which I won't spoil, but there is a moment with just some of the most horrific injury detail, crazily violent. I wouldn't even necessarily call it body horror, but it's just like that kind of. It's not a kind of killing of a person depicted in a film you will have ever seen before. Yeah, because it's just so intense.
It is the grotesqueness of the detail of it that makes it kind of more akin to body horror. Like you could call it. You could towards torture porn if you're really going for that kind of vibe. That has a bad rap in of itself. Not to besmirch Brandon Cronenberg's good name. All I'll say is it involves someone's face.
Yeah.
I'll say that much. And there's just like a sort of heartless brutality to a lot of what the characters do. And it's an interesting trajectory of Andrea Riseborough's character is sort of as the film goes through, she does her like opening kill and then kind of returns to family life, and that without spoiling too much. And she's really struggling to remember to be herself, to remember being human. She's even rehearsing lines to herself as to what she'll say to her family, really mundane small talk, but she has to get her mind into that place. What you see in the violence of the film as it escalates is she seems to take a weird amount of satisfaction in like the most violent way of killing people. She's even told by her employers, stop killing people in as messy ways, in and out, gun to the back of the head, Like, first kill of the film, she stabs someone to death when she's supposed to have a gun, and she leaves the gun. And I think there's an interesting thing there about, I didn't interpret it so much as her becoming more psychotic or psychopathic, as much as she was just so detached and so like,
that's
she
what
was
I took
almost
it as.
trying to like feel
She's so
something.
out of touch with her own identity that by having less understanding of herself, she inherently struggles to understand or empathize with other people as much.
For sure.
So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why that would make her more violent necessarily. Maybe it is like a sort of growing sadism within her that's always been there, or maybe it's just a detachment from reality where
it could also be like the attempt of like feeling something like anger and resentment and hate. Either that's all she's got in her, or she's just trying to bring that out of her.
Well, the film has a sort of general vagueness to it, like we said, with the setting and the actual presence of certain characters in the same body, for example. There's just a general vagueness, and I think there's a sort of vagueness about her character because, like I said, it's a little bit jarring at first because you're introduced to her. You don't really know anything about her. All you know is she has a family life and she appears to have been doing this for a long time, and she's a pro. And is it Jennifer Jason Leigh?
Yes, Jennifer Jason Leigh.
She has sort of this interaction with her where they both seem to be veterans at this particular profession, and that's all you really have to read into, which I'm fine with. I thought that was enough. But then I guess if I'm going to come on to an issue I have with the film, it's the theme of the film is sort of her losing her own identity steadily throughout the film, and a lot of that sort of falls on Christopher Abbott's shoulders, right? Because he sort of has to portray her emotions, and I think the film is quite slow paced at the beginning. And I understand why you would want to leave the character somewhat vague, but I think it makes the eventual conclusion of the film a little bit less impactful because she's already seems to be so detached from her own identity already that by the end of the film it doesn't feel like a huge progression. It kind of feels like she's just gone to the next step of it, which I guess is interesting in itself, but it would have been more interesting to see a greater arc.
I know what you're saying.
character.
Yeah, it feels like you've entered a story like a little too far down the line, and maybe it would have been interesting to see them in, what built them to this first point where they're kind of like losing touch.
Because it's all about the fall of this character, basically, and I want to see that.
And they've kind of
decline,
it's a much steadier decline over this film. That said, I do find the ending to be pretty effective, and in some ways, her being so dehumanized. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty you can read into this film that on an individual level about its statements on the way we interact with one another in society and kind of the disconnect we all feel, maybe like living in another's body kind of vicariously through technology, through social media.
Social media's got a huge element.
It's got to definitely be part of that. And I guess, the emphasis on technology when he's working in the factory, or that kind of ties into that. So her being so far gone and having this sort of really traumatic conclusion to the story, in a way, the coldness of it kind of adds to it, because there's a kind of sensation of like a psychopathy on all sides that these characters all have, and like it's more of a startling horror, not for the character but for the viewer, of like, oh my god, all of this stuff has happened and the character is basically exactly as they were at the start of the film. Like they're almost barely changed.
She's a bit like a Kubrick character in a normal film, because she's like so sort of mannered and cold.
And
she's like, I know what you mean. It's just that I felt by the end of the film it could have been, I don't know, it left me feeling very empty, which I know was on purpose,
right? And
I enjoyed that kind of little dose of sweet nihilism, right? But
it's super
it's just, I felt there could have been that little bit extra nihilism. The fact that she's so cold from the beginning makes the film feel sort of very thematically cohesive, but I don't know, it would have been interesting.
I can see that.
I felt like that would have been more interesting. And I do think, if I'm going on the complaint train, I think the pacing was generally not great throughout the film. I think it lulls, and then it picks up a lot towards the end.
Yeah, it was a bit choppy. There are points of real intrigue, and there are points where it kind of dips. Yeah, no, I can see that.
I did really enjoy this film, though.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the high points with like the sort of the action, or sort of, the gruesomeness of certain parts of the film,
and the sort of dream sequence as well.
That's what I was going to say. Yes, I mean, to my memory, there's a couple of dream sequences, but there's one really big one. During the middle, or sort of around there, where their identities are really clashing. They're kind of confronting one another in this sort of like red space of like red version of reality.
And you get the poster shot.
Yes. Yeah. That's all fantastic.
Like really creative filmmaking visually. Obviously, I don't think Brandon Cronenberg is ever going to escape comparisons to his father.
Yeah.
And judging by this film, I don't think he's trying to.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
But
yeah.
you can see his own style there, because that is, from what David Cronenberg films I have seen, very much unlike most of what David Cronenberg
Yeah. I think there's a lot of thematic similarities, but by no stretch of the imagination would I call it like a copy.
It's still its own thing.
It's not.
Just, it's got its influences.
Yeah, and neither is it an impersonation. No.
Yeah.
Like I say, like it feels like someone who's grown up with these art films, but with his dad's like love for horror, like spurring him on.
Yeah.
So yeah, is this his first film?
It's his second film. I believe.
Okay. Well, I'm interested
It's just
to check
what
out.
Being Canadian does to you.
It was that miserable up there. I mean, you'll have to let us know, any Canadian viewers.
What would you rate it?
I am currently feeling, the more I talk about it, the more I appreciate elements of it. So I'm going with a 7.5 at the moment, but definitely with room to go up to like an 8.
I mean, I'd give it a 7, potentially moving up to an 8.
Right.
Yeah, I'm very keen to rewatch it at some point,
100%.
because it is a film I feel like you'll get more out of a second time around.
Yeah.
Because there are complexities to it in terms of, even just small character interactions, and it's also it's quite an entertaining film.
Yeah, for
as
sure.
well.
Yeah,
even though I complained about the pacing of it, the uniqueness of I guess it's almost like a Black Mirror / Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I guess
type
it does
thing.
very much have that to it. Yeah.
And in fact, I could compare it quite a bit to Upgrade, which is like a much goofier version of this.
Right.
But it's a very interesting spin on that Black Mirror style sci-fi horror.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel. I say it's similar to Black Mirror. It doesn't feel like influenced by Black Mirror particularly at all. So. Yeah, 7 out of 10, solid film.
Definitely, I think one of the most idiosyncratic and interesting horror films of this sort of last decade.
Oh, definitely.
If I were to make a list of essential horror from this era, I'd put this on that list.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. So, yeah, if you've seen Possessor, let us know what you think. But that has been our review, so if you've enjoyed it, press like. If you hated it, press dislike, and subscribe to the channel, because we've got more Hooptober horror film reviews coming out. If you want to see what we're reviewing, there's a link in the description. You should click on it, and you should watch all of our fucking videos, because
Yes, please.
they're epic. So peace out, and see you on the next one.
Peace.